Hello, and a very warm welcome to Section 7, Making the App Ready for the World. In this section, we're going to cover the newly introduced Sign In with Apple that allows an easy and safe way to log in inside an app for both developers and users. We will also add a fancy app icon. Then we will learn how we can monetize our app, and we will also see how we can avoid being rejected by Apple. Let's start with Sign In with Apple. In this particular video, we're going to add a new tab to our app called Account, where the user is able to sign in with Apple to our app. We will also work with the Authentication Services framework and make use of specific UI elements and delegate methods, and we will also see how we can fetch the name and the email of a user. Let's start with creating the view controller first. So make a right click on the project and say New File. We can select the Cocoa Touch class and we will call it Account View Controller. Now we will add a new view controller to our main.storyboard file. We can do that by clicking the plus icon, search for view controller, and we will simply drag it to our storyboard. Next, we will zoom out a little bit and we make a control and drag from the tab bar controller to our newly created view controller. We will select the relationship segue for view controllers. This creates a new tab on our tab bar controller. Let's select the tab icon itself. We will use a more prettier image, something like person.crop.circle, and we give it a title Account. Now let's create some outlets and labels. First, we will add a title label. We can just layout it in the center. We will have a margin of 20 to the left and 20 to the right and 54 to the top. We will center it. We will give it a number of lines 0, and we will change the font style or the text style to large title. Let's type something meaningful in it. Let's say, welcome to burger recipe. Next, we will add a description label right below the title label. So we will give it a constraint of 40 to the title label and as well 20 to the left and 20 to the right. We can say something here like, explore the most delicious burgers. We will change that later anyway to the email address we are fetching from the user. And as a last element, we are adding a stack view. We will add a vertical stack view to the bottom of our view controller, as this allows us to add the Sign In with Apple button later. So let's make it a little bit bigger. We will give it 20 to the left, 20 to the right, and 54 to the bottom. And for now, we give it a fixed height of 40. In that case, a stack view is great as it allows us to add more buttons in a very easy way. So let's create the outlets. Make sure that we're selecting the account view controller on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side, we will drag and drop the outlets here. So sometimes this behaves a little bit buggy, and there's an easy workaround. So we can create the IB outlets manually as well. Just type IB outlet, and we're creating a weak variable title label of type UI label. We can copy that line, and obviously we have to mark it with an @ sign. We can copy that line 2 times. The next one is description label, and the last one is a stack view of type UI stack view. That's just a little workaround if sometimes the drag and drop does not work. In that case, we can just click on the plus icon. Next, we will add the outlets. Let's assign the account view controller class first to our scene, select the identity inspector, and then into the class text field, type account view controller. So let's open the editor on the right-hand side. select account view controller.swift, and we select the account seen on the left-hand side. We can create outlets. The first one we're calling title label. This one is the description label. And we have to create an outlet for our stack view. That's great. We now have the perfect layout for our account view controller. So we can close the storyboard and start implementing the sign-in with Apple. The first thing we have to do is we have to import the authentication services framework. Now, let's create the button with the sign-in with Apple. It is of type AS Authorization Apple ID button. It's a very long name, so make sure you're selecting the right one. Then in the next step, we will add a target to the button, so we are able to handle whenever the user taps on the button. We will add the target to ourselves. We will call the selector or the method we're going to create in a second sign in tapped. And we want to have the target for touch up inside. That means whenever a user presses the button. And last but not least, we have to add this sign-in button to our stack view. We can do that by calling stackView.addArrangedSubview, and we will add the sign-in button. Let's remove the comments below here and create the function for our selector, sign in tapped. In that case, we're going to create the authorization request that is needed, and we will also create the AS authorization controller. So let's create the request first. It is of type AS authorization Apple ID provider, where we call the method createRequest. Now, on the request, we have to select the scopes we want to request. In our case, we want to request the email and the full name of the user. Next, we will create the controller, which is of type AS authorization controller, and the controller can be initialized with an array of authorization requests. So we will create an array that contains our request that we've created before. Now we have to assign the delegate of the controller to ourselves, and also the presentation context provider of the controller is actually the view controller itself. And then last but not least, we have to tell the controller that it should perform the requests now. So as you've noticed, we just assigned the delegate and the presentation context provider. We will have to implement these delegates as well. So let's create an extension of the account view controller. We will implement the AS authorization delegate or the controller delegate. It's a very long name and easy to type something wrong here. Here it is. And the next one is an even longer name. It's AS authorization presentation context providing. So the context providing has a method called presentation anchor. That's just an anchor where the sign in with Apple form should be presented, so we can return view.window, and in case if that is nil, which should actually never happen, we can return an AS presentation anchor. Now, the more interesting method is from the AS authorization controller delegate, and it is called didCompleteAuthorizaton. As the name already says, this delegate method gets called when the authorization is completed. And the authorization object that is passed here contains the credentials, such as the full name of the user and the email. So we want to get that. We will create an if-let statement for the credentials as they can be optional. Then we will access the credential member of the authorization object, and we will cast it as AS authorization Apple ID credential. And then we also create the let for the name, as this could also be optional. So let's say just credentials.fullname, and we want to have the given name. Now inside the if let statement, we will just set the text of the title label It should say like hi and then the given name and the description label. That should display the email that we've just fetched. So just access credentials.email, and then we hide the stack view where we have our sign in button. Now, the credentials also contain a couple of other useful information that you want to save inside your app, such as the user ID. But for now, we just save the name and the email to the user defaults. So we call user defaults.standard and set the value name for the key name as well. We can copy that line, paste it, and do the same for the email. And now in view.load, we can actually handle it. If the user is already logged in, then we're going to hide the sign in button and we show the name and the email. So we will create the if let statement and check whether the user default standard already contain a string for the key name, which would be the name, of course. And we do the same for email. So call user default standard string for key email. And if that's the case, if we have the name and the email, then we're going to set the text of the labels, and otherwise we will add the sign-in button to the stack view. So we will paste that here. And in that case, we just set the text of the title label like we did down below. It should say hi name, and the description label that should display the email. Now, the last thing we have to do is we have to add the capability for sign in with Apple. So make sure you're selecting the burger recipe project and click on capability. Then we're searching for sign in with Apple, add it with a double click, and we can see that it is now added to our project. And now let's run it on the iPhone 11. So we have a compiler error here. We were probably a little bit too fast when just saying email here. We of course have to say credentials.email. Now let's give it a run. So we still have our burgers here, they still look good. And we also have a new tab called account. So let's select account and we can see the beautiful sign in with Apple button. So let's click on it. Then it's explained how sign in with Apple works. And now that's the cool stuff. The user can decide now whether he wants to share the real email address with the developer or that he wants to create an alias that is only valid for this specific app. So let's see how such an alias looks like and select hide my email. Click on continue with password. And now make sure that you're pasting the right password for the displayed Apple ID and click on continue. Now that looks really, really great. So the Apple sign-in obviously worked and we got the given name of the user and an alias for the email address.